Before I even get started, just before I was by the breakfast buffet and I had the privilege to meet two Israeli soldiers that were wounded in the war, Tomer and Noam, and I thought to myself, why are they inviting me up to speak? Their stories are so incredible. Their service for the Jewish people is so incredible. The work I'm doing is white collar. The work they're doing is deep in the trenches defending our people. So Tomer and Noam, if you could stand up for a second, I just want everybody to recognize you, give you a round of applause. Unbelievable. People should go up to them, speak to them. Thank you so much. People always ask me if it's dangerous living in Israel, how you feel with the danger, and I say, we're in the eye of the hurricane, and I feel very safe walking around the streets. And of course, the war has been primarily in Gaza, not in Jerusalem. And as I said on Friday at our little reception that we had before the event started, I noted that, I just came from the holy city to Sin City, and it's a little bit dangerous in Sin City, and I was worried what could happen. And in this week's Parsha Vayera, you read about the story where God was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Avram starts pleading with him, on the basis of, will you save the city if there's 50 holy people? And there's a whole back and forth until Avram says, will you save the city for 10 people? And God said, if there was 10 people, I'd save the city. So I was a little bit nervous coming down here to Sin City, what could happen, but I see here that there's way more than 10 holy people. We had 1,000 holy people here this weekend. So you guys protected my journey, and like I said also on Friday, when you look around the room, you think that this is exactly what the entirety of American Jewry should look like. And to see that what's going on in New York City right now and who Jews are going to vote for potentially in New York and who they voted for in recent presidential elections, you guys are the ones that I think are providing the stability and the sanity for the entire Jewish community. So give yourselves a round of applause. I want to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Israel the last 2 years, where we are today, and then we'll talk a little bit about the eighth front of the war. Now, I think that if on October 7th we were surprised with an unbelievable massacre, tragedy of immense proportions. Hamas stormed the border. They killed 1,200 people. They took 255 hostages. They injured thousands of others. They committed an act so grievous that there was no choice but for the IDF to go into Gaza, something that they weren't prepared to do, in order to rescue the hostages, in order to make sure that Hamas would never be able to perpetrate a crime so heinous as the one they committed on October 7th ever again. And I think that if people would have been told that at the end of the war, Gaza would be 70% leveled, the leadership of Hamas would be destroyed. Yeah, clap. You should clap. That Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, the rest of Hamas leadership would meet their fates. That Hassan Nasrallah would be taken out in Lebanon, together with the rest of the Hezbollah top leadership. That Hezbollah would be pushed away from the Israeli border, that their long-range weapons would be degraded by 85%, and their ability to launch would be degraded so much so that when Israel actually attacked Iran's nuclear reactors, that Hezbollah didn't even fire one shot, when the whole purpose of Hezbollah was to be a deterrent so that Israel would never strike at Iran's nuclear program. If you would have heard in the beginning of the war that by the end, Bashar Assad would no longer be the president of Syria, and that Syria would no longer pose a military threat to Israel and would no longer serve as a land bridge between Iran and Lebanon, you would have signed up for that as well. Nobody thought that Israel would actually do what the Prime Minister had been talking about for the better portion of 20 years, which was actually to strike against Iran's nuclear program, taking out all of their air defenses, taking out much of their long-range missile capacity, including their launchers, their ability to reproduce those missiles, and to strike at the heart of a very sophisticated nuclear program, to the extent that now their nuclear program has been set back by many, many years, if not permanently degraded. That's an incredible accomplishment. And then, if you would have been told at the very beginning of the war that you would bring back in 2 years every single last living hostage, that would be an amazing result that everybody would sign up for. I think that we can safely say that after failing for so many years, allowing our enemies to build up their military capabilities on our borders, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, and Iran, and even these Houthis who we never thought about previously in Yemen, that we would defeat this entire network of Iranian terror proxies. I truly believe that the results of this war, that what we've managed to accomplish is going to create a decade, 2 decades at least, of quiet, peace, and prosperity for the people of Israel. I muted myself. That's ironic. Now, I think that we're at a place which is somewhat precarious after the announcement of the 20-point peace plan. People are very uncertain about where we are today, what comes next. There's definitely a lot of open questions about who's actually going to take over the Gaza Strip. Right now we know that Israel is controlling 53% of the Gaza Strip. We know that the 20-point plan calls for the complete disarmament of Hamas and the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. Yet we know that the party to this agreement, Hamas, is a terrorist organization that has in its charter the destruction of the state of Israel, and that they are not going to voluntarily disarm. Now, I think for Israel, the main purpose of this agreement was to get back all of the hostages, living and dead, in phase 1 at the beginning, with the understanding that Hamas may or may not carry out their obligations under this agreement. But understanding that the hostages were the number one ace card that Hamas had, and that it was a supreme obligation for Israel and the Prime Minister to bring the hostages home once and for all. But they also understood that there was no deal to bring the hostages home without a comprehensive deal. And therefore, they had to lay out a comprehensive deal. The deal that was signed is a deal that Israel presented the overwhelming majority of the points to. It's not to say that the United States didn't have some input. That's not to say that there were not some demands from the other side, or that there were bitter pills to swallow, including the release of 250 convicted murderers, terrorists sitting in Israeli jails. In addition to that, we released 1,700 prisoners, which were rounded up in Gaza during the war, explicitly for the purpose of a trade in which we would get back the living and the dead hostages. I believe we've gotten about 15 bodies so far of the 28 dead bodies being kept hostage in Gaza. We know that Hamas is playing games, slow-walking the return, staging the placement of bodies and showing how they found the bodies that they had just placed there before. I mean, Pallywood continues. It's certainly psychological torture for the families that are involved. It's also incredibly important to get back the remains of every single body, aside from just providing closure to the families who desperately need it. You know, we knew that there were for sure 20 living hostages in Gaza, but we were unsure about the fates of maybe 2 or more of the other hostages. And so what you need to do is you need to get back the remains of all of the dead hostages so that you know that there's a final accounting and you know what happened to every single one of the 255 people that went missing. Because if one or two bodies don't come back, you don't want to get into a situation where you find out a month, 2 months, or a year later that there was another living hostage that you didn't know about. So very, very important to continue to bring back all of the bodies of the hostages. Now, with Israel in control of 53% of the Gaza Strip, that means that the rest of the territory, 47%, it's not really clear who's running those sections. We know that Israel has been arming and providing backing to as many as 10 clans inside Gaza Strip, including the Abu Shabaab clan and others. Not that these are great people, by the way, okay? These are armed militias. But they understand that rebuilding is only going to take place in areas that they may control if those areas are disarmed from Hamas and demilitarized, and that those clans are willing to work with Israel during the rebuilding process. So, again, while these are not necessarily those that are going to win Nobel Peace Prizes, well, I guess Yasser Arafat won a Peace Prize, so maybe they will. But they are at least willing to work with Israel, and that's a better situation than you had with Hamas. And as President Trump said, you cannot fight against the entire world. I think this is really important. You know, there's many people inside Israel that wanted the IDF to keep going, to go to the last Hamas terrorists, and there's probably about 10,000 terrorists running around with submachine guns inside the Gaza Strip. As we've seen, they still have IEDs, there's still some RPGs, other things that they have. They don't have the same number of rockets that they had before, the rocket production capacity that they previously had. But if Israel would have went forward, the question is, how long would that have taken to get to the last terrorist? And you can't fight the entire world. We saw that the diplomatic situation for Israel was getting more and more bleak, that nations that used to be allies of the Jewish state were threatening arms embargoes, that the BDS movement was actually created for October 7th and what would come after. And therefore, it was valuable to get to a deal where you could stop the offensive fighting. And more important than that the humanitarian situation that's inside the Gaza Strip, in which 70% of all buildings have been destroyed, in which 80 to 90% of residential houses are uninhabitable, that the responsibility for the rebuilding here is not on Israel's shoulders. The President of the United States said that he's going to create a board of peace and set up an international stabilization force to govern the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip with the support of countries from the Arab world, including Qatar, including Turkey, including Egypt and others, the Emirates, others. And therefore, when things finally get quiet and the journalists finally get allowed back into Gaza and everything settles down and people realize the extent of the destruction, it's going to be on the United States to say, we're the ones that are committing to the rebuilding over here, not Israel. We supported what Israel did. We're going to take care of it. And I think that that's really critical. And so while there's a lot of people on the right in Israel that are very upset that all of a sudden you see that in Kiryat Gat, there's 200 American troops that are overseeing in some way, shape, or form the ceasefire and the rebuilding effort, that this is a much better solution diplomatically than if Israel would have to shoulder the blame and the responsibility for the situation in Gaza. It's no longer the case that Israel is going to be considered the occupying force in any areas where Hamas is not operating in the long term. And if Hamas does continue to operate in those areas, then of course the IDF is going to stay there. And you'll see a situation similar to the situation in Lebanon, where while there is a ceasefire, you see that the IDF is striking on a regular basis whenever they're identifying terrorists, terror movements, and the rebuilding efforts of Hezbollah. So I think the situation is going to present itself as being relatively stable in the months and weeks ahead. I think that there's a lot of accomplishments that there are to celebrate here in terms of the military victory. Now, round of applause, please. Absolutely. And I think that the round of applause really goes to the brave soldiers of the IDF that looked evil in the face, that picked up arms, that did what they needed to do to secure the Jewish homeland in the present and also to secure Jewish peoplehood for the future. Is incredible work by our IDF and also incredible war leadership. We know that the Prime Minister has been fighting multiple battles simultaneously. On the one hand, you had to fight a military battle on 7 fronts. He had to fight a diplomatic battle. Don't forget, he started this war under the Biden administration in the United States. That the Biden administration was calling openly for Netanyahu's removal from office. In many ways, it was when they started calling for Netanyahu's removal from office, the Netanyahu, who I believe was fairly shell-shocked on October 7th, finally shifted back into that gear that I think most Israelis knew that he was capable of to provide the type of war leadership that was necessary to fight on all these different fronts. But he's had to navigate the military battle, the diplomatic battles, keeping a coalition together, which is not a perfect coalition by any means. Even if it's ideologically aligned, it doesn't always function as well as it should. And also, at the same time, dealing with a court case in which the court is forcing him to testify at a trial as many as 2 or 3 days a week for 5 hours at a time for cases in which the court has already told the prosecution that you don't have a case and that the charges should be dropped. And we heard President Trump in his address at the Israeli Knesset, he turned around to the President of Israel and said, "You can stop all of this and please pardon the Prime Minister." Now, in addition to all that, the Prime Minister has talked about this not being a 7-front war, but being an 8-front war. And we know what the 8th front is. It's the front of information. And in the same way where I think that Israel was neglectful to allow Hamas to build up arms and tunnels inside Gaza, the same way that Israel was neglectful to allow Hezbollah to develop an arsenal of long-range and sophisticated rockets that could threaten the Jewish state, that Israel was also neglectful in the information front, assuming that it wasn't as dangerous as others, as we've seen it to be. And we actually understand that Hamas had no capabilities to defeat the IDF on the military battlefield. I mean, what do they have, 50,000 terrorists? We mobilized 350,000 troops on the first day. The IDF is one of the most technologically advanced and battle-ready militaries in the entire world. So they're not going to defeat the IDF on the battlefield. So how does a terrorist organization defeat the IDF? And it's by committing an act of terror so egregious that the IDF comes in and then has to root out terrorists from amidst the civilian population, where they have to find tunnels that are coming into the children's rooms of residential buildings, where rockets and command centers are being kept in mosques, in schools, and underneath hospitals, where we know hostages were being kept in the basements of hospitals in the Gaza Strip, right? And then when the IDF would go in and conduct its battle in this booby-trapped urban fighting environment, that the death counts would go up, and that's when the international community, led by the mainstream media, of which the number one player here is Al Jazeera, and the Palestinians themselves have more than a dozen of their own news agencies that are also Qatari funded and funded by others. And the UN agencies, the UN Security Council, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, all of them would turn on Israel and create this diplomatic storm to delegitimize and demonize the Jewish state for fighting a defensive battle, for fighting the battle that the Prime Minister of Israel calls the battle for all of Western civilization. And quite frankly, we're not ready to fight this battle. I think that in many ways, Israel did a better job getting information out quickly, especially in the early months of the war, until we saw at a certain point that it really didn't matter, that the narrative that the international community wanted to tell through the mainstream media and through social media was a negative narrative. And ultimately, this is really where Hamas thought that they could defeat us by delegitimizing us. And if they could get the IDF to stop in its tracks before getting its hostages back, before Hamas was removed from power, and then economic boycotts or arms embargoes could be thrust on the Jewish state, this is how Hamas would win the war. This was their strategy. And again, I think that we're unprepared for that. Now, we know that Qataris are putting more than $200 million a year into Al Jazeera. And they're able to do that because they're a dictatorship, a monarchy that's in place for decades. They can put money wherever they want. Israel's a democracy, and you're not going to see the government of Israel put $200 million into a state-run media organization when you know that there's going to be an election in less than a year from now, if not within just a few months from now, that a new budget's going to have to be passed. And then somebody else comes in and says, what's this $200 million going to this thing that Netanyahu set up for his own Hasbara? You know, we're going to cut that budget. Or, you know, it's a good idea, but we don't want those, we don't want Netanyahu's people running that, so we're just going to take those people out and we're going to put in our own people. So you cannot count on the government of a democracy to do this job. Now, JNS has been fighting the media front really for the last many years, but specifically on hyperdrive over the last 2 years. I've personally done over 2,000 interviews with mainstream media since the war started. And together with my colleagues like Jonathan Tobin, Melanie Phillips, Ruthie Bloom, and others, with a strong bureau in Israel and the United States, we have been fighting the good fight, not only to counteract the narratives of the mainstream media, but quite frankly, I would suggest that most of the Jewish media in Israel is not doing a service to the Jewish community because they've decided that the most important thing to do is to discredit Netanyahu and his government. And in that way, they've actually been discrediting Israel and doing a lot of diplomatic harm to the state of Israel. So I do believe that in the months, weeks, years to come, that JNS is going to continue to grow as a force in the media with support from good people like you. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're a reader-supported, viewer-supported news agency. If you're not getting our news, please do so. Please sign up for our newsletter at jns.org. Please go to our YouTube channel, JNS TV, for real-time analysis. I think that the Jewish future is going to be very, very bright, particularly in the state of Israel, and it will be with your help and with the continued resilience of our young people, our soldiers, and I also believe that with some strategic thinking that we can win this soft war, we can win the battle of narratives, we can win the media war as well. Thank you very much.